My entitled parents break into my house while I'm gone for work and stay for weeks, refusing to leave and expecting to live there for free. Things had become so terrible that I had to call the cops just to get them out. Here's what occurred. I'm a 30-year-old man, and my parents didn't want children. According to relatives, I was an only child and had an unintentional pregnancy, as my parents said they planned to have no children when they married. My childhood was initially enjoyable, but I believe that once I outgrew the charming and adorable era, my parents were less likely to spend time with me. They both worked and ran their own businesses, which they established jointly. That business was their life, and I was always second to it. Other close family members, such as my grandparents, resided far away, and I knew little about them until I became an adult. So I spent my entire youth without any other family members. I was virtually raised by television and my professors. My own birthdays, by the time I was a teenager, were frequently spent without my parents, who would just give me money and instruct me to go out and buy anything I wanted. It was similar to buying for Christmas, and, on occasion, back-to-school supplies. We would not have bothered with a Christmas tree after I turned 10 if I hadn't persuaded my parents to buy an artificial one that I could assemble and then disassemble later each year. If I had to describe my parents, I would say they wore black all the time, drank a lot of wine, and looked down their noses at everyone else. When I last saw my parents, they looked and acted the same, but my father was always sporting a toupee. When I turned 16, I asked my parents if I might work part-time for them at their business, and they simply said they didn't have any open jobs for something like that. They may have just stated that they did not want me there. After I reached 18, my parents informed me that because I was an adult, they expected me to leave as soon as possible. I was working part-time because I was still in high school, and I didn't have nearly enough money saved for college. But not long after high school ended, my parents urged me to gather my belongings and move out. They received an official eviction notice, giving me 30 days and everything. They didn't even help me relocate. I had to seek assistance from a friend's father who owns a truck. I ended up renting a crappy flat and working in retail. I didn't have any real-life experience and had no time for college. Then, after only a few months, I was dismissed because my manager had it out for me and wrote me up for the most ridiculous things imaginable. Worst of all, I am not the only one he would do this to. I called corporate about it, as did a few others. Corporate investigated the manager, and they were quickly fired for a variety of reasons, most of which I am unaware of because the situation was generally kept quiet. But someone told me that it involved theft and smoking. The manager was a chain smoker. Corporate declined to hire me back, saying simply that they would amend the record to show that I was laid off rather than terminated, so my resume would remain clean. I assume they thought I was damaged or something. I went broke quickly because I was poor at handling my own money and couldn't find consistent work. So I lost my apartment and went back to my parents, crying for help, but they refused to take me in, even for a short while, to help me get back on my feet. I ended up homeless and living in a tent in someone's garden over the winter. My buddies had all gone to college, some in different states, and I was a broke youngster doing whatever labor I could to stay alive. My salvation came when one of my parents' neighbors discovered I was living in a tent and offered to take me in for a short period of time so I wouldn't freeze. She assisted me in bothering my parents sufficiently to get them to inform me about other members of my alienated family. My parents refused to say anything, most likely because they were afraid of being criticized for tossing their kid out in such a way. But they coughed out the information, gave me a contact list, and then told me not to bother them again. So I phoned my grandparents on my father's side of the family, who were startled and delighted to hear from me because they hadn't seen me since I was a baby, and I am their only grandchild. My grandparents, upon learning of my circumstances, flew me over to live with them as soon as possible. They had virtually adopted me by this time. My parents did not even accompany me to the airport, despite being offered to do so. I had no communication with them for about a decade. My grandparents stated that they despise my parents for treating me so badly. They have virtually formally disowned them by removing them from their wills. My parents, I'm told, were upset to hear that, but they also stated it didn't matter because they were well off and didn't rely on my grandparents. But it's interesting how the universe works, since that remark turned out to be completely false. After roughly a year of living with my grandparents, I was able to afford to start attending community college. I earned an associate's degree, landed a decent job owing to a recommendation from my grandfather, and eventually, my grandparents offered to sell me their home so they could retire in Arizona. My grandmother desired to relocate to a warmer area because the frigid winters were becoming increasingly difficult for her health. I was sad to see them depart, but I was happy to buy the house. They sold it to me for 1/3 of its value, and I'll have it paid off in only a few years. My job requires me to travel on a regular basis, so I may be away from home for weeks at a time. Not that I mind the travel. I don't have pets, a partner, or anything like that. I honestly don't have time for them right now, but I'll make time in a few years when I have some things in order. I do not want to remain a lonely bachelor for the rest of my life. With all of this in mind, one day in late 2020, I returned home after only 2 weeks abroad to find a massive white van in my driveway that I did not recognize. I was about to contact the cops when I realized the van had the emblem of my parents' business on the side. I felt dread at that point. Yes, my parents were there. They had somehow broken into my home and were living there. They had the audacity to greet me like we were buddies the moment I stepped in. I told them to leave my house, but they refused because it was Grandma and Grandpa's. I explained that it was no longer their house, that they sold it to me when they retired, and that they would have known if they were involved in my life in any way. But they threw me to the wolves 10 years ago, with no life experience. We fought, but they refused to go. My father informed me that it was his parents' house first, which implied that he and my mother had every right to live there if they wanted to. I hurried straight into my bedroom, locked the door, and called the cops. When the cops arrived, they were of little help. My parents told them that they had already been there long enough to obtain residence, which was a blatant falsehood, but I had no cameras to show they hadn't been there for a month. My neighbors didn't have cameras either, so it was my word against my parents about how long they'd been there, and they were claiming squatters' rights. They informed the police that they had a verbal rental agreement with me, and that I was attempting to illegally evict them for no reason. My mother began to cry as she said it. The cops informed me it was a family quarrel and that I needed to seek an eviction with the courts to get them out. This was in 2020, and going to court for anything took longer due to the pandemic. Meanwhile, my parents were squatting in my house for free, rubbing it in my face. According to the information I obtained from them, their firm went bankrupt, and they sold practically everything they owned to pay their obligations. They had only the van and a few personal possessions remaining, so they planned to live rent-free at my house for the foreseeable future. They were both working as well. My mother worked as a sales associate, while my father was a delivery driver. They were making money, but the only things they paid for were electricity and water bills, which amounted to handing me a $100 bill every month and telling me to be grateful they were paying me anything at all. When I tried to talk proper rent with them, they just said I owed it to them to live rent-free because I took 18 years of their lives, and it's not like they were seeking money back for that period. They threatened to stop assisting with the utilities completely. I was so frustrated that I called my grandparents and explained the matter to them. They were furious and spoke with my parents, but my parents insisted that they had every right to remain in my home and refused to compromise. My grandfather apologized for the situation, saying that if they hadn't sold the house, my parents would not have invaded. I told him not to feel sorry. I had already filed for a legal eviction and would be receiving it soon. My parents were well aware that they were on borrowed time. I made sure to say it in front of my folks. They merely gave me the quiet treatment. My father was gone the most of the time, driving a delivery vehicle 6 days a week, which was not his favorite job. My mother also attempted to take over my residence in her leisure time. She insisted that I let her rearrange my living room and even tried to persuade me to give her and my father the master bedroom, all because they were my parents and deserved it. I vetoed both of those things, telling them they didn't deserve better and to quit acting as if I owed them anything. I did not ask to be born, and it is customary for parents to raise their own children. All they were doing was asserting their control in order to keep me from kicking them out. Finally, after 4 months and now in early 2021, I was able to take my parents to court over their squatting. We only had to go to court because they contested the eviction and tried to intimidate me into canceling it. They attempted to utilize the fact that it had previously been my grandparents' home, as well as the fact that they were paying me $100 a month as leverage for residency. However, there was no formal leasing agreement. They were astute enough not to try to fabricate one, as it would have been fraud, so the judge ordered that they leave my residence within 30 days because they had no title to it. After court, they confronted me and expressed their disappointment in me for kicking out my own flesh and blood. And when they stated that, I couldn't help but laugh and call them hypocrites because that is exactly what they did to me, with no regard for my well-being. They didn't love me, so I don't love them. I owe them nothing. They simply pretended that everything I owned belonged to them, but they had no right to call themselves my parents because they never behaved like it. I called them a pair of snooty, lying narcissists in their faces and urged them to get their affairs in order, since they already knew I'd call the cops if they didn't leave my residence by the end of the 30 days. And as I stated, my father became upset but my mother intervened by gripping his shoulder and shaking her head. He scowled at me before walking away. They left, but with a lot of stress. They spent the final month either guilting me into changing my mind or utterly ignoring me. I hung a calendar in the living room and marked off each day before they were to go with a red marker, and the actual day they were supposed to depart was marked with a large red circle. My parents waited until the exact day they needed to leave my house for good before they ultimately went. Even after they had moved everything out of the house, they spent a few days sleeping on the floor in the guest bedroom. I believe that since they were so confident that they could persuade me to let them stay, they didn't bother looking for an apartment until the court eviction was completed, and my mother spent weeks scrambling to find one. They had to acquire a tiny, horrible studio apartment in the next city over, since it was the only thing they could find on such short notice, which is just amazing karma, because this is precisely what I had to do when I was 18. I drove my mother over to view it once, and the flat was awful. The walls were baby barf green, and the carpet appeared to be 20 years old. The lone window provided a glimpse of a brick wall outside, and there was no dishwasher. My mother went out of her way to give me sorrowful glances, implying that I should be feeling bad and that I was degrading them by living in such a little place. But I pretended to ignore everything until she stopped doing it. They signed the lease immediately and spent the weekend moving what little they had into the apartment. They also demanded the queen-size bed, dresser, and flat-screen TV from my guest room. I ordered them to take it and leave, since I didn't want them in my house after they had spent 5 months sleeping in that room. They looked at me as if I were treating them as if they were sick, and they demanded nothing else. When they had to depart for good, I began changing the locks on all exterior doors. All of their junk was in the flat, and they had spent their final night in my guest bedroom. They saw me start taking the old lock off the front door as they got into the vehicle. They said nothing to me, and I said nothing to them, but they sat and observed for a while before noticing a new doorknob on the door. Then they left. I let out a huge sigh of relief the second that van drove down the road. I believed karma had finally caught up with them, and they might live under a rock for all I cared. But nah. My grandparents recently heard from them. They had called to gloat about their new business, which was similar to their previous one that failed. It appears to be profitable, allowing them to resume looking down on others. I've already Googled their company, and it appears to be doing well. They have numerous positive evaluations of everything, but to be honest, I'm feeling rather resentful. They put me through being homeless, unlawfully occupying my home for months, and then returning to their snobbish, wine-drinking business ways. So if karma exists, it's taking a little longer than I'd want. What a weird situation to be in. I completely appreciate the original poster's point of view, which is that they are disappointed that their parents have managed to recover. To be honest, you have no control over it, but you can manage the fact that they are no longer in your life. You will never have to deal with them again. You were able to express yourself and effectively retaliate for what they had done to you. You kicked them out when times were tough, and you demonstrated exactly how you felt when you were kicked out. All because you were 18 years old and a child. In general, such parents were terrible. So if anything, I'd be relieved that you'll never have to deal with them again in your life, as it could be the nicest silver lining to all of this. My partner does not desire a job, yet he is a great person. Right now, I'm unsure whether I should stay with him. What shall I do? I am a 27-year-old female who has been in a relationship with her partner for approximately a year. He's 35 years old. When it comes to myself, I am financially secure and own my own home. When I first met my partner, I assumed he was well off because of the upscale neighborhood where he resided. It turns out he stays on his parents' sofa and is unemployed, but I didn't mind because he was extremely caring and patient with me. I've taken him on vacation, bought him gifts, stayed in expensive hotels, and spent money on many meals for us. I was thinking about buying a house for us, and we were joking that he was my sugar baby. It was fun at first, but then we got into a fight last week about whether I lost my money overnight or just didn't have any money. So I asked him, "What if I don't have any money anymore? What might happen to our relationship?" But all he could reply was, "That would be a shame." Now that he has said that, I am quite disgusted. It has made me reconsider our relationship a lot. His counter-argument is that money is not the focus of our relationship, and that he has put in equal effort by caring for me emotionally. I admit I am a demanding partner since I have BPD and am spoiled. I've been with him for a year because he is caring, loving, and understanding. Nobody has ever taken the time to listen to me with such patience and compassion. Most of my prior exes worked 9 to 5 and were frequently unable to meet my emotional demands at work, let alone my daily concerns. So, I get where he's coming from. However, I'm wondering if this connection is still worth pursuing. He believes that taking the time to care for me is his kind of love, and is equivalent to the money I've spent on him. He has no motivation to find a job, and this has been true for as long as I've known him. His explanation is that he does not want to take on any random job since he believes it is better to focus his energy elsewhere. So I am not sure if he has a lot of money. If anything, I believe he only gets money from his parents to buy meals for himself. With a full stomach and a roof over his head, I understand why he isn't motivated to work. Should I continue this relationship? I wasn't seeking a sugar baby, but that's how things have turned out. What shall I do? If you want to have a long-term relationship, I believe he should have a job. The dude is 35 years old. He only has money because his folks give him it. That's quite irresponsible at that age. There is simply no good excuse, in my opinion. Sure, he is there for you emotionally, but he is also present because he has a roof over his head and food in his stomach. In my perspective, this individual is a leech. He is using you for money and shelter, and if I were in your situation, this would be a huge deal breaker. I wouldn't put up with this for a second, and I'm amazed you do, because I believe you know for a fact that if the money and house disappeared, he'd most likely go to someone else, looking for another sugar mama to meet his needs and desires. And that is exactly how he sees you. You're meeting all of his bodily needs, and I'm sure if they all went away, he would too. So, in my opinion, you can do much better than this guy, because your partner is a complete leech. Unless he makes some substantial changes and, who knows, obtains a job, I don't think this relationship will endure very long. My boyfriend's sleeping problems are becoming an issue, and I'm not sure what to do. I have been with my boyfriend for 7 years, and we recently moved in together. We've taken extended road trips and slept together for 1 to 2 months at a stretch with no severe problems. We've had a few more sleepovers without incident. The other day, I arrived home late from school and proceeded to kiss my lover on the head while he was sleeping. He jolted up, reaching out one hand to grip my throat and the other in a fist. At first, I was laughing since a kiss scared him so much that he appeared horrified. Last night, about 4 a.m., he woke up by grabbing my arm with both hands and jolting me awake. I tried to talk to him in the morning and tell him he needed to visit a doctor since he appeared to have some sort of unresolved trauma, but he refused to talk about it. When I sleep on his chest, I occasionally accidentally wrap my arm around his neck, and he always lowers my arm and tells me he feels choked. He stated that he had a dream in which his father held him down and tried to acquire leverage to turn him over, which is why he grabbed my arm with both hands. He also stated that he awoke with my arm over his neck, which could have been what prompted it. On another trip, he awoke and sat up. He admitted to having a dream in which he was in an automobile accident. Earlier this year, he was in an accident in which he was hit on the driver's side and his car was damaged. He acknowledged experiencing PTSD for a few months but says it has mostly subsided. My partner lived in a dreadful house as a child for roughly 8 years before moving out 3 years ago. While he lived there, he would wake up at 2 a.m. to hear his father and girlfriend bickering. Punching holes in the wall would jolt him awake and draw him into the situation. He has also had to remove his sisters from dangerous situations and has gotten into conflicts with his father and girlfriend in order to protect them. I also know he used to sleep with a knife under his pillow and once had to call the cops on his father's girlfriend for things she tried to do to him. When I visited him in his room, he exclusively slept with the door closed and locked. I'm not sure if this was due to his roommates or earlier trauma. Now he'll only sleep with the door shut, something I had to get used to after moving in, and he won't go to sleep until I do. He used to go to bed late, between 1 and 4 a.m., and had previously professed to being afraid of falling asleep. Everything is coming together, and I'm not sure what to do. My guy was in therapy for 10 years and does not want to start again. He's dealt with his troubles in the past, but they all seem to come out in his sleep. He claims that if he visits a doctor, he will only be prescribed anti-anxiety medications or recommended therapy, so he does not want to go. He advised me not to touch him in his sleep, and that he believes the terrible incident occurred because I wasn't already home, and he didn't know who I was while he was sleeping. This situation is really messy and sensitive. I'm not sure what to do. That's sad that your boyfriend went through that. It sounds like he has severe PTSD. I can only imagine growing up in such a frightening environment that you don't know if you can sleep well. It must have been terrifying, and it clearly had a significant impact on him. While I'm sure he's dealt with his issues in the past, it sounds like there is still something going on. So I believe therapy would be the best option for him at this point. He becomes physically violent in his sleep, which I can see becoming an issue or being quite harmful in the future. I believe you're getting off easy with what he could accidentally do if he hadn't realized it was you in the first place. I mean, he almost punched you in the face when you kissed his forehead to wake him awake, and he used to sleep with a knife under his pillow. That's some major trauma right there. I know you love your lover and want to spend time with him, but it would probably be a good idea to sleep in a different bed for now. His difficulties clearly manifest themselves as he sleeps, and the last thing you want is to be damaged or hurt because he has another episode while sleeping.